Welcome back to Why Blank Lost. I'm David Bloomberg, and with me, as always, is, of course, my co-host, Jessica Lewis,
Hi,
who is here
everyone.
to celebrate with me that I finally got a prediction right.
Oh, we're going to start here.
Of course, we always start here. I mean, okay, I should say half a prediction.
Yeah.
It was literally impossible to get the whole prediction right because Rocksroy and Romeo both ended up on the same split tribe.
Oh, so there's a little asterisk next to
Yes,
that.
yes. And I sort of got the other prediction right because I said last week that by finally not predicting Tori would go, that would probably mean she'd go. So yeah, just had to undo the reverse butterfly effect.
Butterfly effect
Yeah,
in full
gone.
effect.
Yes.
For sure. Yeah, we won't talk about my choices. I wasn't even close. It was terrible. But I had forgotten that we had to pick two. So, yeah.
You were doing it on the fly.
I really was.
On the butterfly.
But I tried. But of course, we have to start with David, you're half right.
Yes, David, you're half right. I'll take it. Can I get a 3/4 for the Tori non-prediction?
Oh my,
thing?
really? Percentages like this?
You got to negotiate a little bit, I'll start getting into the 0.6667%, and
Yeah, I think we're gonna need Voce for that.
Yeah. All right. Well, this week we have two people to talk about, of course, both of whom were originally from the Ika tribe, and both who were seemingly at odds with each other the whole game.
Yeah.
I also think we'll find out there are some similarities in the reasons they were voted out, strangely enough. To determine that, of course, we'll follow our usual path of comparing their games to the rules for winning I originally wrote way back after season 1, and have been updating ever since. We'll look at all the non-spoiler information available to us from what we saw on TV, interviews, social media, and secret scenes, except literally as I'm sitting here, I realized I forgot to check the secret scenes. I saw the Romeo one. That was very nice. I totally forgot to check the other secret scenes. So hopefully there's nothing hugely revealing in there that someone's going to come back and be like, you missed this.
Yeah, don't ask me either. I might have forgotten.
Oh.
And when I realized that, I was like, oh, it's okay. Bloomberg watched that.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of like my employees at work who are soon going to find out that they have to edit their own documents and they can't just say, oh, David will do it. David will do it. I don't have to pay that close attention. David will do it. Yeah, guess what? When David isn't there anymore, you're going to have to do it.
All right, I apologize. I didn't keep up that end of the.
No, it's okay. Neither did I. I mean, okay, so we'll figure it out. Recently, there hasn't been. They've been nice secret scenes. They just haven't been very informative secret scenes.
Yes.
And I can't imagine there's anything terribly revealing about Rocksroy and Tori either. Now, even though our focus is Rocksroy and Tori, we usually have a few things to discuss before we get to the rules, but so much of this episode was taken up by the two tribal councils and the strategy leading up to them and the challenge, so we don't have nearly as much as usual. But of course, we need to mention the second tribal council apart from the result of Tori leaving, and specifically how Drea and Marianne handled the situation. We have, of course, loved them from the start, and in terms of the game, this once again showed how Drea has such a good read on what's going on around her as she sat there processing everything in real time. I mean, at first, I didn't really get what she was doing with the I don't know part, but it was just, she was literally thinking through what is going on here. What am I seeing? What have I seen? What's historically? And then once it came to her, it was, just seeing someone process it like that. It's just amazing. And
it really was incredible. Yeah, she's been a badass since the beginning. Right. But I do find it fascinating that we were able to watch the process as it was happening, as she was putting it all together. And one of the things that Jeff did say, this is a live tribal, and we've often said, tribals are not live. And I think that we actually did get to watch one.
This one was a live
happening. Yes, because we actually saw it happening. We saw her putting everything together and figuring things out. And I think it was really great to hear some of in the exit interviews, the things that were being expressed that we didn't necessarily see, that was in addition to what was being figured out in that very moment. So yeah, she was just incredible.
Yeah. And then of course, beyond the game aspect, They did a great job explaining their thoughts and feeling and what all of this meant to them and in the context of everything else. And again, it was just amazing to see the two of them who had not really been on the same page previously within the game. We had kind of joked about that, the page, the paragraph,
right.
whatever.
That's right. We did.
Yeah. And then now they're so on the same page that they literally stood up together to play their idols in a show of solidarity.
Yeah, it was a beautiful moment. And they just did such a phenomenal job speaking their truth and representing it to everyone who was watching. Really great moment, and something that I think we'll definitely be remembering for a very, very long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, apart from that, and I know it's kind of jarring to switch into these different topics here, kind of like Tori said, really, do we want to go vote now? But what we have to do. On a much lighter note, later we'll talk about Rocksroy trying to form the Guys Alliance. But I do think it was funny the way Omer and Hai both made fun of him. And you will be surprised to hear that I already posted a TikTok of, I know,
shocking,
of Omer mocking him. And I might do another one later of Hai doing the same thing. Omer just did. Omer was hysterical, just mocking him.
I just loved how he responded with the smile. I love that idea. And then it just immediately cuts to him saying how, what? Really? Like, we're not it was so great because he really was so convincing in that moment.
Yeah.
And I love how he responds to everyone who is approaching him with different ideas of what they would like to see happen, because he's so welcoming of the idea and willing to consider it and talk through it. And it's very, very convincing. He's just doing such a great job maintaining the relationships with everyone around him and not being called out for it either, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. Now, someone else who was not as convincing, but was even funnier, was at the very beginning of the episode when they come back from tribal council and Romeo is like, oh, no hard feelings. I love you all. Da, da. And as I'm watching and live tweeting, I'm like, yeah, he means none of it. Immediate cut, just like you were saying for Omer, immediate cut to him saying, I hate all of them. I don't trust any of them. They're all liars. I want to kick them all in the face.
Yeah, that's one of the expressions I like.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, okay. And hey, you'll be surprised to know I made a TikTok on that already too.
Oh, shocking.
I know.
I'll have to check these out so I can maybe like those for you.
Yes, everybody should.
Everybody should.
Yes. Now, before we now move on to how Rocksroy and Tori did, I probably should have practiced saying Rocksroy and Tori, Rocksroy and Tori, Rocksroy. It's like an exercise, all the different letters in that phrase. Weird tangent, I know. We need to mention that the rules we're about to discuss come in a shorter and much more colorful version in poster form.
I got it.
Every time. Go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed, scroll to the poster, and click on it. In addition to the poster, we also have other ways to get the rules. So, for example, there is the poster t-shirt, the checklist t-shirt, there's the checklist mug, there's also a poster mug, sweatshirt, you name it. So
it's all
again,
out there. Buy it, wear it, hang it up, love it.
Yes. Go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed.
There you go.
So, with that, we can move on because Rocksroy and Tori were tribe mates from day one.
You know what's? I got to stop you there for 2 seconds.
Wow, that was okay.
Right.
That was no,
I know, but I had kind of forgotten that until I started preparing for the podcast, and I was like, oh, wait a second. So this, I feel like, is going to be an even more interesting dive into everything because they were together from the beginning.
They were.
So I really started to appreciate their interviews even more because they did have so much time spent with each other. So I had not really recognized that until I started prepping. So
yeah. I mean, half of the remaining Ika tribe was gone like that.
I know. It's crazy.
So
crazy.
All right. So, yes, they were tribemates from day one who really never saw things the same way, but their games also ended on the same day. I'm a poet and I don't know it. Tori barely made it past the first vote and knew her days were always numbered. I'm not going to rhyme something with numbered. I don't even know what that would be. She said something in an interview that we almost never hear, but that I wish we would more often, which was if she could play again, she would do so many things differently because, quote, if you didn't win, you should regret a lot. Yes.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Rocksroy said in an interview that he was still wondering what happened. Still so many differences. But as different as their games were on the surface, were there any similarities in the reasons they were voted out? It's time to figure out why Rocksroy and Tori lost. The first and most important rule is, of course, to scheme and plot. Well, not to Rocksroy. To him, the most important and perhaps only rule is build and provide. Indeed, he told Rob that his strategy was to be relevant and needed, and said similar things throughout all the rest of his interviews, just in case we couldn't tell from what we saw on TV.
Yeah, but I do have to say that even if that was his idea, he wanted to be relevant and needed, to him, it was at least a strategy. I'm not saying it was.
And it wasn't, that wasn't even a solid strategy for winning 20 years ago. It was in the rules.
Understand.
It was in the rules.
Old school Survivor.
Right.
Get it. Totally understand. But I do think that Rocksroy probably had an idea that if he was helpful around camp and if he was doing things and providing, that then people wouldn't have a reason to necessarily look at him because, oh, well, he's feeding us. And so I do think that there is some idea there that I can kind of get behind because, yeah, you want the person there that's feeding you. But he even said, it doesn't even seem to matter that I'm feeding them. So I feel like at some point he should have put two and two together.
Gotten the clue. Yeah.
What? But I can respect the idea. I can respect wanting to be the provider and that him thinking that if I am the provider, then they will be less inclined to want to vote me out because I am feeding them. But unfortunately, he was playing with people that did not feel eating was then.
I don't know that there was that much food anyway, but yeah, he just never got the news that what was in 20 years ago, which was only barely in 20 years ago, is not in today. There were so many quotes from his interviews that we could mention. One that I think pretty well sums it up. He said, we had shelter. We had fire consistently. We had the little bit of food that we had. I tried to be that provider. They understood that my best interest was our best interests. How can you get rid of Rocks when he's looking out for our best interest? And that's the kind of strategy that I played. And you know what? Sometimes that may work for a while in the tribal portion of the game. It did in his particular case, but that's not the way to win, which of course is what we talk about here.
And I think what's interesting about the quote you just read, he was saying things, what's in their best interest is in my best interest. And he was kind of putting those two things together when really what he was doing was in his best interest because he thought that it was going to benefit his game and allow him to stay longer. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the person who you are providing for is going to feel like you have their best interest because they could have been looking at it like, yeah, Rocksroy is just doing this because he thinks it's going to keep him around. And they might try to start picking that apart. And rather than saying, wow, he's really providing for us and this is great, it could be, well, he's not strategizing with this. He's not really trying to come up with a plan as to how to move ahead, but he's building a shelter and he's providing us food. That's not enough in this particular type of game that's moving like this.
Right. Exactly. And, we've talked before about how anything you do in this game should be for your own benefit. So even if you're proclaiming tribe, you should only be proclaiming that if it helps you.
Yes. And that's what I think he was doing.
Right. I agree. I absolutely agree. He thought he would stay around. My only thing is you're not going to win the game by doing that.
Right.
You may stick around a few votes.
Yes.
You're not going to win.
Yeah, because people want to know that the person that is sticking around is also playing the game with them.
Right.
And one of the things that I thought was interesting, when High was talking about Rocksroy, he said, you only talk strategy with Rocksroy when Rocksroy wants to talk strategy.
Yes.
So it's kind of hitting him from two directions, right? Where he thinks that on this hand, because I'm providing and helping, then people will want to keep me around. But he's alienated himself from people over here by not actually talking strategy, gameplay strategy with them until all of a sudden he wants to. And so you can't have it both ways, right?
Right.
If you're going to help the tribe, but you also need to be working alongside the game component with the people that you want to play with as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that goes back. Remember, as I said, these rules were written after season 1. They were modeled off of Richard Hatch. Richard Hatch was a provider.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
That he liked to think, and he used fish as a weapon. They're mad at them. I'm not going to catch as many fish today.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't why he won. It was on the list of things that were good, but it wasn't why he won. His brain was why he won. Not his spearfishing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But even in Rocksroy's last few hours of the game, so his half of the tribe shows up at their new location. They mention, there's only 3 or 4 hours before tribal council. So what does he immediately do? I'm going to go check for food. What?
And he thought he had his plan in place.
Well, exactly. He said guys are more rigid in their decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So to his mind, it was done. He said in interviews he thought he had a good thing going with the guys, and I think he just believed it would be that simple. You say guys alliance, and then whoops, you're with all the guys. Well, then you just vote out Romeo and you're done.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting too because he really turned the tide on himself in that moment by all of those conversations, which I think is fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm sure we're going to get to that, right?
We might get to that in the second rule.
Maybe. I'm not.
We'll just have to wait. No spoilers. Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned that he did do some strategizing on his own terms.
Yes.
And there were apparently a couple instances. I want to give whatever credit I can. I ring out the credit. He told Rob that he and Drea had a mostly silent alliance. And even when he was proposing the guys' alliance, he wanted Drea along with them.
Yep.
Okay. Excuse me. That's believable, although it sounded like I was just coughing as in mock, but that was a real cough. It was probably initiated and maintained by Drea, whatever relationship they had, but okay. And then Tori said in interviews that despite what we saw on TV, she and Rocksroy still had a working relationship, and he was feeding her information when no one else was. Also possible. But who knows if that was actually part of a defined strategy on his part. When
I saw that, I thought it was interesting because we really didn't ever see that. And I did feel like a lot of things that they were saying was started with, you didn't see this, but.
Right.
You didn't see this, but. And I despise when that's what's happening because then are we
not
getting
for them, but because of what's not shown, you mean?
Right, exactly. Yes, because if they were doing that, that's rather interesting considering how their relationship was portrayed as not necessarily getting along and butting heads. But then there's this idea that they're secretly sharing information with each other. It would have been great to actually get that nugget of information while watching the show as opposed to just hearing it in the exit press.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, how often do we say that, unfortunately?
I know.
It's more dramatic and better if they show the two of them, going at it.
Oh, for sure.
And let's face it, they had plenty of material to work with.
Yes.
Now, moving from Rocksroy, Tori was, of course, the complete opposite in this rule. One of them described, I can't remember who said it, but described the two of them as oil and water.
Yes.
And it certainly applied when it came to this rule. She had all sorts of plots and plans going into the game, which she laughingly said in her interviews didn't work. But she was trying. She tried to make alliances and get into a solid position from the get-go. The only problem was it wasn't successful.
Yeah.
We'll talk about some of the reasons for it not working as we move through multiple of the rules. But one thing that did manage to work for her was at least sticking around vote by vote. We talked at the time about how in both Ika tribal councils, she was one of 2 possible targets. And in both cases, she turned things around on the other person, even though that other person was one of her closest allies in each case.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to Survivor, if it's you or them, you got to do what you got to do.
And she definitely had the ability to do that. I do think it's interesting that one of the components that we talked about with Tori pregame was all of the things that she was bringing into the game as part of her strategy, right? Mm-hmm. She was dressing in certain colors, putting her hair up, wearing glasses, and trying to be seen in a particular way because of her therapy background. And so we were very curious to see how long is this going to last, because eventually, you know, the hair is going to come down, the glasses are going to come off, and the people are going to hear you speaking and probably figure some things out. So I really think that she might have set herself up badly. And this is something we talked about, where she almost misrepresented herself when they saw her pregame. Mm-hmm. And then once they started interacting with her, they were like, wait, this doesn't seem to fit. You know, this isn't what we anticipated and what we expected. And so it might have been to her benefit to just be herself prior to coming out to play the game, because I think maybe then she would have been able to connect more easily with them, because I don't know if maybe people saw that there was a disconnect between what they expected versus what they ended up actually seeing when they met Tori.
Yeah, and we said that in our pregame podcast. You know, we said, you know, it might be that, you know, people see that and they're like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
I do think, and this doesn't really fall in any rule. It's just something I thought about when you were talking about, you know, she lied and said she was a caretaker instead of a therapist. Whole game. Nobody ever knew. But it's just funny because some scenes, she is so obviously being a therapist.
Yeah.
I mean, even her last scene, it's like, okay, let's go around and everyone explain why it is that you think you want to vote me out. It's like a group therapy session.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And, you know, it didn't work, but it was just like watching that. I mean, and I know you're out there, you're not paying attention necessarily to those things unless it's obvious, like someone being obviously a Boston cop. But yeah, it was just funny to watch that, you know, it's like, well, I'm not going to be a therapist, you know, and then there you are being a therapist. So,
and we did say that the caretaker wasn't too far off from being a therapist either.
Right. Moving back, you know, off of my little tangent there, you know, moving back to after the Ika tribal councils, all that backstabbing, her reputation followed her into the merge. She had some ideas, but others from Ika, particularly Drea, made sure everyone knew what kind of player she was. Still, Tori said in interviews she had a plan. She told Mike Bloom, I knew I was going to be targeted like the first few tribal councils, but I know on Survivor, if you could just make it a little more, people are going to want to start making moves. And I'm clearly a number. I have no one else. And really, she was right. I said just last week that I half expected her to fade more into the background as new targets emerged. But it's hard for someone like Tori to fade away too much. You know, especially since another part of her strategy was trying to play up the rivalry that we were just talking about between herself and Rocksroy. You know, she said in interviews that she wanted people to think that Ika was not working together, even though she wanted Ika Strong to at least be an option for her, although it seems pretty clear it wasn't an option for all of Ika, like Drea.
Well, and I feel like this is one of those plans that unless you have Ika in on the secret, it's not going to help you, right? Because here you are telling everybody else, I'm done with Ika. I want nothing to do with them. And I'm going to air all of their dirty laundry and tell you everything that happened. But really, I want to work with Ika. But it's only to herself. Like, so if Ika finds out that this is what she's saying and this is what she's doing, and then you have Drea actually telling people this is what she does, and then she does it, unfortunately, you need to have like a bunch of people on the inside.
Yeah, you need to have code words, like symbols, like, you know, yes, I'm really against Ika.
Something like, so so again, it's one of those ideas that sounds great, but it's not going to work, obviously, if you're the only one who's doing it.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, I think the biggest problem for her was how she chose to handle the overall situation of being seen as a target. Because her strategy, as she described it in interviews, was if her name was going to be around, to stir things up and then out-talk the person. Now, that happened in the Ika tribal councils, though it's hard to say how much of it was her out-talking them and how much was them out-talking themselves or other people already making that decision. I don't think, I mean, we talked about at the time, neither of those were live tribal councils.
Right.
But then at the merge, as we just discussed, she went out of her way at Applebee's to air all the dirty laundry and proclaim herself a free agent. You know, she told Mike Bloom, in past seasons of Survivor, that works. When there are people on the bottom, you get scooped up and you'll get used as a number for someone else's benefit. That just didn't happen with me. People were like, oh, you want to help me benefit my game and pull my moves off? Nope, I still don't want to work with you, Tori.
Yeah, and I really feel like this turns into a numbers situation, right? Because we were curious how the numbers were going to fall when everybody came together, because we did have such, I think it was 4, 4, and 4, right? As far as the divisions. So if you are bringing in your numbers, she's not going to be a number at that point, right? If you look around and you're like, okay, well, there's 8 of us already. Okay, we're good. We don't need any more numbers because we clearly have the majority. We have 8 people who are all agreeing to work together. And then we have 4 over here that even if they get together, it's not going to matter. They can't do anything.
Right.
And so when you want to be a number, it has to be at a point in the game where that number really matters. Like, you become the swing between 2 groups. And she was never able to get there because that's not where they ever were at the time. And so I think, again, it's like the idea makes sense, but it has to make sense with where you are in the game at that point in time.
Right. I mean, she did say she tried to get the people who she thought were on the bottom. But the problem was she didn't know who was actually on the bottom. You know, we've talked about before, just last week, I think, that group never like walked down the beach all together.
Right.
And so she didn't know Omer wasn't on the bottom. He did a good job of portraying it as if he was.
Right.
And similar things like that, where, you know, I think there might have been someone else. She said, oh, I thought this person was on the bottom, and it turned out they weren't. So she tried to gather the numbers.
Sure. And this is why I think, like, again, the idea is good, but the rest of the players were doing so well in how they were structuring their alliance and bringing everybody together that it really was throwing everyone else off. So so her approach makes sense because she has seen a lot of Survivor and she's a self-proclaimed Survivor expert, and it clearly sounds like she had plans and she knew what she needed to do to get through the game. But your plans will only work so well if that's what's happening within the context of the game. And she, like you said, didn't know who was actually on the bottom because they were all playing so well.
Right. I do think that besides that, you know, she was right. In past seasons, what she planned might have worked, except for what we just talked about, what you just described. But also, it could have worked with different players other than specifically her. She had the right idea, but the execution, along with one big reason she couldn't fade into the background, takes us nicely to the second rule, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. And Tori was identified as being, quote, sneaky as early as the first episode when Romeo saw it. He would go on to say she has no alliance to anyone. Rocksroy called her unpredictable. Drea said Tori couldn't ever be calm and didn't trust her. And so it went for the rest of her game. It seemed like every time she tried some sort of strategy, she was identified as overdoing it.
Right. And unfortunately, that kind of became what she was known for. And the people that knew her to be that way, they also shared with other people at the merge.
They encouraged that belief.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So she certainly was unable to get away from that very early on perception of what people thought she was doing. And I do think it was because she was coming across a little bit hard at the beginning, you know, where she was coming at Rocksroy more than Rocksroy wanted her to do so. And it maybe this has to do with her the therapist background where she wants the information so she can figure things out and kind of make a determination as to why something is happening. But it certainly wasn't working because the way that she was, I mean, and you know what?
Right.
I really enjoyed her in her exit press because she's very aware of everything that transpired and what she could have done differently. And so I do think she came in with like a really big plan. And then we've said this before, you can come in with a plan, but if it doesn't fit with what everyone else is doing, your plan will fall through. It's not going to matter. It's not going to help because you have to be able to adjust with who you're playing the game with.
And you have to be able to enact it without, I mean, that was the thing. The first 2 votes, she was a target for being sneaky, and she got out by being sneakier.
Yes, right.
You know, that doesn't help. I mean, even when it worked, you know, like, okay, yes, you got Swati voted out, but that was just because the others were more worried about Swati in that moment because Tori was so obviously untrustworthy.
Yes.
We talked about that at the time, you know?
Yeah.
And so when she was going on and on at Applebee's, she thought she was putting herself out there for someone to use, like, oh, take me as a vote.
Right.
But I think she was so over the top in her behavior that the message she tried to send was not the one that was received.
Yeah.
What everyone else saw was red alert, red alert.
Yeah. And it came across maybe a little like desperate, but I don't really love that word. But there was, it clearly showed her to be on the outs much more than I think she really wanted to appear. It's one thing to be like, hey, so what was happening on your tribe and what was happening on yours and sharing information. She was just like, hold up, I've got some stuff to tell you. And just started telling them everything without necessarily being asked about it, which I think was why it really, as you said, was a red flag because it was very, very clear what she was desirous of. So if her idea was, I want to be a free agent, you can become a free agent, but not be so obvious about your desire to become a free agent.
Right. I mean, yeah, if she was going to turn on her original tribe that quickly, that blatantly, how does anyone else trust her?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
You know, I mean, Lydia said in her post-game interview that Tori was, quote, raked through the mud and, quote, dead on arrival at the merge if she hadn't won immunity. And, you know, her actions in regard to this rule were a big part of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Rocksroy, on the other hand, was solid as a rock. He called himself predictable. He, you know, so with that in mind, you might think, well, there's no way he could violate this rule. But he did at the end. And I think you brought it up earlier.
Yeah.
When he attempted to form a guys alliance because there was already a core majority alliance that he was in. Now, whether he remembered he was in it is another matter, but okay. But he decided there were more men than women. I say there were, he decided, he counted. Hey, there's more men than women. So obviously that should be the deciding factor. I mean, you can't argue with math, right?
And 20 years of Survivor, right?
Right. Yeah. So he went to each of the guys to get it going. But, you know, then he claimed to Omar, oh, I'm not trying to lead anything. Yeah, you were. That's exactly what you were trying to do. And you didn't do a good job of it.
And this is what I find so fascinating about this particular move, because this isn't something that I would equate to like a big move like we've talked about where suddenly this was.
You got to get more intonation. Big move.
I know. Where he was trying to create something that was completely unnecessary for him to create. I mean, you've already indicated that he was part of the majority, whether or not he actually knew where he fell in that majority. But so this was kind of an unnecessary thing for him to even be doing because he was fine. You know, there was no issue with how the vote was going to go. There was no issue with who was actually going to be leaving. It was just this thing all of a sudden where he like he did math and went, wait a second, there's more of us than them. So why don't we band together? But there was no reason to do that, especially if you still
there was a reason. Nobody had ever thought of that.
Well, and the other thing too, you have Drea. So if your goal is to bring together all of the men, but then you also want to have Drea, like, why are you, you don't need to be recreating the wheel here. You already have Drea in the group that you're with. There's no reason to change anything now.
Yeah. Yeah. He said to Mike Bloom, I knew that I had to make a move at some point. Was it too early? Maybe. I don't think, maybe. I don't think what Omer and High, or I don't think that Omer and High surprised me too much. The game is moving so quickly. The time is so much shorter for you to make a decision on what you're going to do to build a relationship. I had lost 2.5 days not building relationships with people because I was exiled on the island by myself. I think that has to be taken into account as well. I did not get to see a lot of the other social dynamics that were happening because I wasn't there to see them.
Okay. So this is the worst time to try to like throw a wrench in the works, right?
Yes. And the other thing is that time that he lost was days ago. He has had plenty of opportunity to catch up since then. He was indeed exiled on an island by himself. It was an island of his own making because he chose not to strategize till this point. And then he tried to compensate by doing it too much and in the wrong way.
Yes. Yeah. For sure.
All right. Third rule tells players to be flexible. Jessica, what do you think about Rocksroy? Super flexible and easygoing?
Well, I would like to quote Omer, if I could, in regards to...
I think what you're about to say is the next line in my notes. Go ahead.
That Rocksroy provided less room to maneuver, that he was immovable, he's unshakable. So I'm pretty sure that determination by Omer was Rocksroy is not flexible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, and this actually goes back to what we were just discussing. He suddenly wanted to be flexible.
Right.
By creating an alliance he didn't need to create. And so I think the idea was a little misconstrued as to what that means to Rocksroy. And I think for him, it would have been like, oh, maybe we don't want to vote this person out, we vote that person out kind of thing, instead of completely switching everything up. That doesn't make you flexible. That makes people very confused.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, him not being flexible was kind of amusingly a constant in his time in the game. So him being solid was a solid part of his game. Going all the way back to the beginning with a hysterical story that Zach told in his interviews for anyone who doesn't remember. He said the fire pit couldn't even slightly falter if not to receive the wrath of Rocksroy. And when he was talking to Jackson at Ponderosa, he said, wait, you guys weren't collecting firewood 24/7? You guys didn't have a massive pile of firewood that just stood in the corner so that you could survive in the wilderness for the next 6 months? And when Rocksroy went to do a confessional, it was the first time they got to experience Survivor without him. And everyone ran to the water to have fun swimming around.
Right.
But even then, Zach said they were constantly looking around the corner to make sure Rocksroy didn't come back. Because, you got to hide your fun from someone, which, I think that goes a long way to show just how inflexible Rocksroy was there.
Yeah, and I do think that, I don't know if this is necessarily in regards to flexibility, but one of the things that Tori had spoken about in her exit press was finding out that he was a stay-at-home dad, and then having that realization that, like, oh, well, that's why he talked to us the way that he did, because he's used to talking to children.
Yes.
So he was the dad maintaining the camp and maintaining everybody. Don't play too much. Get your work done.
Yeah, don't go in the water until 30 minutes after eating. Oh, we're not eating. Never mind. Still, just don't go into the water then, So, all right. Well, since he was not very flexible, what did you think of Tori in terms of this rule?
I think she was insanely flexible. I think she was trying everything she could to keep herself in this game as long as she could. So I got to give her props for trying to come up with any potential option, plan, anyone but me strategy was working, because that's what she was managing to pull off the first 2 votes. But for her winning immunity, I think she would have probably been booted right at the, or the merge, right at the merge. But yeah, she was certainly trying to work all of the angles when she came in to the merge. So I think, yeah, absolutely, she was more than flexible, maybe too flexible.
Yeah. She might as well have been quoting this rule when she said, I've learned to adapt and be flexible. She knew she had to try different things. And, she wasn't always exactly the best at each of those new things. But hey, she made the attempt.
She did.
So, all right. Well, the fourth rule tells players not to let their emotions control them. I feel like the only emotions Rocksroy showed out there were his love for the shelter and campfire. What do you think?
He did a great job with that.
Yes, I know. He loved it. He nurtured him. He loved them. Do you think any of those emotions got in his way?
Okay, so it's interesting because we just talked about how people were concerned that he was going to get upset if the fire wasn't maintained, right, and if the camp wasn't maintained, and they didn't want to go swimming because they didn't want to upset him. So I don't think it was necessary. I think it was not his emotions that were controlling things, but I think it was more just, this is who he is as a person, and he presented himself in a way that caused an emotional response to the people that were around him, which then negatively affected him in the game.
Yeah. As for Tori, we discussed in the first rule how she turned on her closest allies, Zach and Swathi, in the 2 Ika tribal councils when her own head was on the chopping block. And that is something you just have to do as a player.
Right.
We've seen people in the past getting emotionally attached, being unwilling to turn on an ally. Tori was not going down that path.
Right. Which is fascinating because those were the 2 people that she wanted to work with.
Right. But it was one of us, not me,
Right. Exactly.
Just like she was fully willing to straight out lie when it was needed, not letting any sort of emotional baggage get in the way. She knew this was a game. She played it like a game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, the 5th rule reminds players they need to pretend to be nice and play the social game. Neither of the people we're discussing today were what I would call experts in this area.
What you just did, too, reminds me of how Rocksroy described his own social game when he was talking to Rob and his ex. Because even he went, my social game.
Yeah. I mean, we could start with him because it was sorry, I had notes otherwise, but the way I have it, because you didn't know, I don't know how to put a note for that. I had my social game was sometimes. That was how I heard it anyway, and
there was definitely a kind of he might have went as well, but there was a very clear indication that he understood his social game was not what it needed to be.
Right. And we saw that in the game after Swathi was voted out, which he didn't know about. And he even came back and said, I'm not picking up on social cues. And, my quote, social game is really not good. Now, I don't think that was a newsflash to the rest of the tribe, because we discussed in the 3rd rule how Rocksroy behaved at Ika and the stories Zach told and all that. And from the first episode, he seemed annoyed that he couldn't boss around younger people on the tribe the way he tells his own kids what to do. And remember, his own kids were like 5 and 6 or 5 and 7. So slight age difference there between, who he was dealing with. And, Tori even said in her interviews that him acting that way was the root of their misunderstandings.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned. I do think Rocksroy had other problems, or rather problems with others too. Romeo didn't like the way he was acting. Zach talked about him pissing everybody off. All the way till this episode, you already mentioned that Hai talked about Rocksroy, and the way he talks to him makes him upset. And so you gave part of the quote. The first part of the quote was, he's very blunt. He cuts people off. He doesn't let you finish your thoughts.
Yeah.
So even though Rocksroy asked Drea early on if he was coming off poorly, and Drea said yes, he didn't really seem to change anything.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of those circumstances where you've just kind of fallen into being a particular way. It's very hard to be something you're not when you are put into a situation like this. And so I think he kind of fell into that natural role that he was at home. He's the provider, he's taking care of his children, and he's being a great dad and doing all of these things. But when you're playing Survivor, those things might not translate so well, especially when you are playing with adults who don't want to be ordered around and don't want to be told what to do. And I just think that Rocksroy was just kind of missing that carryover, that there are certain things that I might do in my real life that I don't need to do here, and I'm not going to, because this is a game. But he really just kind of fell into the natural way he was. But again, it didn't fit when you're playing Survivor.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we already discussed how Rocksroy's strategy, such as it was about working hard. And he was getting pissy about, quote, work ethic and camp stuff. That carried all the way into this episode. And I think you mentioned it earlier when he said he was complaining still that nobody cared that he'd been working hard. Yes, Rocksroy. Exactly. Nobody cared. And yet you kept focusing on that. That's what I meant. When I said earlier, I know it sounded harsh when I said he didn't get a clue, but he never clued in that.
You got to read the room.
Right. You're right. Yeah. People didn't care. So change, adapt, be flexible.
Yes.
Now, as far as Tori, Dalton Ross noted when he was interviewing her that she never seemed to get her social footing in the game. And Tori said she's self-aware and knows she doesn't give off the best first impression. The problem is that's not what she said that I saw in the pregame, because she indicated, I come off as a very sweet, trustworthy person. And she also said that as a therapist, she knew how to appear warm and open. Neither of those things happened in the game that we saw. Maybe the warm and open happened and it just never made it to TV. Who knows? But she even told Mike Bloom that she tried to build social relationships, but people didn't want to work with her. And again, I think a lot of that stems from earlier in the game when she was doing things like haranguing Rocksroy about Shipwheel Island. You know, I mean, she did feel she made some inroads with Marianne, Romeo, Omer, and maybe Lindsay. The problem is, as we discussed regarding Lydia, just having a social relationship isn't always enough. Yeah, she thought she was good with Omer. Everybody thought they were good with Omer.
Right.
I mean, it will not surprise me one iota if Omer wins at this point, because
he's fantastic.
Yes, everyone thinks they're in with him.
I know. He's just, it's so amazing. It's so amazing to watch. Yeah.
Now, the other thing is that even as she said she was trying to build on those relationships, we saw her biting sarcasm come through multiple times. It started in the first tribal council, like when Zach said something and she made this really sarcastic remark to the point that Jeff was like, okay, let me make sure you're being sarcastic, right? She's like, yes. And, you know, it went from there. Now, don't get me wrong. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a big fan of sarcasm myself. But I'm not playing Survivor.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And I do think that Tori was such a mixed representation of herself. When she talked about how people perceive her and what she was worried about, I think one of the things she was worried about is people would see her as a mean girl until they met her, and then they would find out that she wasn't. And I think if you spend too much time in your own head trying to analyze how other people are going to perceive you and what other people are going to think about you, then you kind of overcompensate.
Right.
And again, you have to be very self-aware when you're going to play Survivor, because people will perceive you a certain way. But I think a lot of her issue probably came from that overcorrection, that I want them to see me as very helpful and that friendly and outgoing, and that I can hang out with them and we can talk. But it became too much, too soon, too fast. And then it just became something that people didn't want to have to be dealing with, because it was really thrust on them. And I continue to think about that one scene, which you mentioned when she was talking to Rocksroy and she's coming at him about the Shipwheel Island, and she's trying to explain why she wants the information, and like, and it's, you just got to walk away. You just got to say, okay, and not try to push too hard, because it's not going to be seen in the way that you necessarily think it's going to be seen.
Yeah, he must have felt like his 5-year-old asking a question. Why? Why? You know, as a parent, you're like, you want your kids to ask why and learn, but oh my God, stop it. You know?
Yeah.
But you know, at least Tori said she is aware now, because one quote she said is, "I cringe when I watch myself." I'm like, why are you doing that? Why are you saying that? Stop.
Yeah. I'm curious if she was also like the some of her facial expressions were great too. The eye rolling and good stuff.
Now, there is also a part of this rule, to close it out, that says to keep your politics and controversial beliefs to yourself. And while Tori apparently did share her religious beliefs with some of the other players, again, that was something we really didn't see until literally her final words.
Right.
But she seems to have done a good job of hiding her more controversial beliefs, which she probably realized wouldn't fly very well with others.
Yeah, I mean, I think she was trying so hard to present herself in a particular way as we were talking, and then had kind of created this vision that she wanted everybody to see and what she wanted people to know Tori to be. That was probably one thing that she was very cognizant of going into the game, because as I said, she's studied Survivor and she understands there are certain things that you probably don't need to focus so heavily on.
Exactly. All right. Well, the 6th rule warns against being too much of a threat. I would not say that either of these two was a threat to win the game. I did mention earlier that I thought if Tori made it past this vote, she might have been able to fade a bit and last longer.
Yes.
But I also think in that case, she would have been the 0 vote finalist. And frankly, the same I think is true of Rocksroy. If he would have made it to the end, I think both of them would have been taken there because they were not any competition for two very different reasons.
Right.
Her because she played too much, him because he didn't play at all. But, you know, so from the perspective of it being a threat to win, neither of them really, unfortunately for them, fell into that category.
Right. I mean, I think Tori's threat level came from the possibility that she could continue to win immunity. And so that would just keep her around that much longer. But there is something to be said about what you've pointed out, is the longer some people stay in the game, the more people want them to stay in the game, because they're like, well, I can just bring this person in the end and I don't have to worry about them in the final 3. And I do think that both Rocksroy and Tori probably fell into that category where, yes, the longer they're there, they're essentially taking a spot from someone else, because everyone's starting to look at, well, who do I want sitting next to me and who do I think I can beat in the end?
Yeah. And there are other threats just besides winning. Rocksroy said back in episode 4, the biggest threat is Tori. She can't keep a secret. She can't be trusted.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've already talked about how so many people felt that way about her. We saw how she turned on Zach and Swathi, her closest allies.
Yeah.
So why would anyone want to get close to her?
Yeah.
And we already discussed how Rocksroy decided to try strategizing with his guys' alliance, and that threatened the status quo as well, even though he himself was not really a threat.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, because we talked about how it was unnecessary for him to do that. So I do think that you then create doubt in people's minds. Like, is all of a sudden he going to change his mind again? Because I thought we had a plan. Like, I thought we were all in the same boat here and we were all going to do this thing. And now he's changing it.
Yeah. All right. Well, the 7th rule covers idols and advantages and game mechanics. Starting with Rocksroy, we've already mentioned he took a trip to Shipwheel Island. When he was there with Lydia, I thought at the time that it was smart for neither of them to really give much information to the other. Looking back, I'm wondering, maybe by your laugh, you know what I'm going to say. I'm wondering if Rocksroy didn't give any information because he didn't know any and have any to give. He didn't really know what was going on in his own tribe.
Yeah. And that's quite possible, because I do feel for Lydia when she was talking about how hard it was for her to even try to have a conversation with him, because that's one hell of a trek that they're making. That's a long walk. And to have no conversation really at all must have been very frustrating for Lydia, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I, I don't know. Yes, it was a long, silent journey. At least he wasn't being nagged during it.
But to his credit, he didn't then divulge everything
No,
back
he
at camp
didn't.
to
Yeah,
everyone.
no,
So I think that there's a good understanding that he had,
right.
that, like, I'm not going to tell anyone what happened. I'm not going to tell them what I did or didn't do, because they don't need to know. I don't want them knowing what transpired.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. I
Mm-hmm.
don't understand why he didn't tell them, though. I mean, yes, Tori was being absolutely ridiculous. We already talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, don't tell her. But it made him seem sketchy unnecessarily. I
Right,
don't
and
think
that's
it.
true.
I don't think it ever turned into anything. But when literally you didn't risk your vote, therefore you didn't lose any. Why not just tell them that?
And that's true.
I,
I was looking for some good stuff.
I know you were looking for the positive. You always are.
Thanks.
So yeah. Now, speaking of being sketchy, we could move into Tori. Because yeah, she specifically said in the first episode that she knew not to go off alone for an extended period of time. And then she did it anyway. She seemed to think, and we talked about this at the time, but it was a while ago. She seemed to think she covered it with a story about searching for tarot, and nobody would ever figure that out. And yet somehow all of them saw through that carefully crafted plan.
It's crazy.
You know? And then, of course, let's not forget that she then lied to viewers by claiming she was just looking for food after she had already told us what she was doing. So she was even being sketchy to us.
Well, at least she was looking. She tried.
She did try.
Yes. Oh, but I thought this was interesting what she said in one of her interviews about the first challenge when Hai ended up rubbing like fake blood all over him. Like, she was supposed to be on that leg, but then she basically told Drea that that's the shorter leg when it was actually the longer leg, and she was all proud of herself, but then realized later maybe I should have just done it. Yeah. So this is, if you have an opportunity to do something, maybe just do it, because you never know. There might be an advantage nowadays.
Do you think she would have smeared blood all over herself, or would she have been smart enough to be like, no, I'm not doing that?
I'm still surprised Hai did it and got away with it. Yeah.
So, yeah, I should say, she did play her shot in the dark properly. Of course, she had the benefit of an open tribal council where everybody literally voted aloud for her.
Right.
So it wasn't like there was much of a choice in the matter. It was like, she even said in an interview, I didn't even ask. I just said, okay, I'm going to go play my shot in the dark now.
Right. Which Lindsay could have played hers too, right?
Yeah, but there was no point. So the thing is, and I know a lot of people on Twitter were confused about this point. I know Jeff said just the previous episode, well, from now on, there's going to be 12. At the merge, there's going to be 12 with 2 safe scrolls. But I'm sure for the split tribal council, they put it back to 6 and 6 with 1 safe in each. So here's the thing. If Tori pulls the safe scroll, well, then she's safe. And there's not anything else Lindsay can do. If Tori doesn't pull the safe scroll, Lindsay knows that Tori's out. There was no, because everybody voted aloud.
Right.
So there was
makes sense.
She would have just been wasting her shot in the dark.
Okay. And I was curious about that. So thank you for explaining that.
Yes.
Professor Bloomberg.
Yes. This will be on the quiz. So just wait for finals. I don't grade on a curve. Anyway.
I'm the only one taking the test.
You don't know that. There could be others, maybe some listeners will take the test too. Yeah, who knows? Now I'm going to get tweets. Where's the test? I need it for college. Anyway, moving to Appendix A, it's about the tribe keeping their end goals in mind when voting. We talk about voting out the weak, then the strong, the weak, then the strong. That really had no bearing in this particular vote. What, continuing with Tori and the tribal council with everything out in the open, there were only two choices. One of those people, Lindsay, was aligned with two of the three people making the decision because she was in their original tribe.
Right.
The other person making the decision hadn't liked Tori from day one.
Yeah.
So it was clearly in all of their best interest for their end goals to get rid of Tori.
And they were pretty clear in their reasoning.
Yeah, I don't know.
You didn't want to work with me since the beginning. They were like, okay, you want to know why? I'm going to tell you why.
Yeah.
And they did.
That might be my next TikTok, by the way. So I may have seen this scene like 50 times already while going through and putting in the words.
Okay, a little preview for the listeners. All right.
Yeah. Although it won't be a preview by the time. Well, it might. Yeah, it'll be a preview if you listen quick enough.
Yes.
Then you'll get it before the TikTok. Of course, you won't know that until after you've gotten to this point, so you won't know that you did or didn't listen. Okay. Sorry. Just time travel.
Yes.
But anyway,
we need an hourglass.
Yes. Oh God. The point is that it was funny when Jonathan said, "You lied to me," and she had just argued against Drea, where Drea said, "You've wanted me gone for a while," and she's like, "Not true, but okay." Right. And then Jonathan says, "You lied to me," and she doesn't even deny it. She goes, "Yes." And
well, she was being honest.
Yeah. And so I still don't know. And I know I still don't know what she thought she was going to gain out of this, unless she was trying to help us with our podcast. Like, you know what? This will help David and Jessica. I'll get them all to explain why I lost.
Right. Exactly.
So,
maybe that was it. I had an epiphany here while we were chatting because I mentioned the hourglass.
I thought I saw a light bulb above
a little bit, right?
Yeah.
We never talked about the hourglass in relationship to Rocksroy.
Yeah, that's probably because I blocked it out of my mind.
And I don't love it, and we don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but I did find it interesting that he talked about how he debated not smashing the hourglass, which is just silly.
Well, excuse me. I mean, I think it goes back to our point that what makes it obvious is that it gives the smasher safety.
Right.
I think if it didn't give him safety, or it gave him safety either way, then it takes the personal element out of it.
Sure. But he was considering not smashing it and then battling for immunity.
Right. But I think probably what happened was he was like, well, why would I battle for immunity? If I could just have it right here.
He did talk about thinking about it and considered not doing it.
You should always consider everything.
Well, Erica was like, no, I wanted to smash it as soon as Jeff was sitting there.
Well, yeah. Erica was in a different position too. She knew.
For sure.
Yeah. So, but as we predicted, by the way, this will not be a repeat. The hourglass smasher will not win. Clearly, but speaking of him, in this appendix, I think that it was something of a similar situation to Tori. He had annoyed Omar and Hai with the Guys Alliance talk because it would end up hurting their games. And Romeo was certainly on board to flip the script to save himself. So they were all looking ahead. They saw that he was more problematic for all of their long-term survival.
Yeah. Especially, I do appreciate the way that Omar was looking at it, because he was looking at Final Five immunity. And who can I more easily beat when we get down to that Final Five immunity, and realizing that all guys, that's not going to help me, So exactly. I do think it's great that he is thinking long-term as opposed to right now. And I think that unfortunately, like Tori was in that right now kind of moment. She had to be, where everything she was doing was, I need to figure this out right now because this is where my game is right now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's about time to wrap things up. So what are your final thoughts?
I think the oil and water analogy that has been utilized for both Rocksroy and Tori is very representative of the games that they each played. I think that Rocksroy was very calm in his approach to the game, but desirous of being something that he is in the real world while playing the game. And so the two didn't really jive with what he was trying to achieve. I think he thought if I provide and I come in here and I build a shelter and I provide them food, then I will become, as we said, necessary and needed, and then I won't be voted out. And that is a very nice approach, and it's a great idea, but it is not conducive to the actual playing of the game Survivor. And then on the flip side, we have Tori, who she came in with all kinds of plans and ideas that were very strategic and lots of things she wanted to do, and things that she wanted to actually achieve a game, which was inclusive of 5 individual immunity wins. So she had kind of mapped out her entire game as it related to playing the game. But then she didn't give any thought to, how do I play the game with the people I'm playing the game with? And so I think Rocksroy was overthinking the relationship component, where I'm going to be a provider and they will all keep me because of that. And Tori was like, I'm going to be this strategic person and I'm going to play the game so well that I'll be fine and I'll be able to stay and make it to the end and win all these immunities. And so they really were coming at the game from completely different perspectives and didn't understand that the people they're playing the game with is really going to ultimately decide how their game is going to flourish or not flourish. And so unfortunately, they found themselves in very bad positions right away because this was how they were playing the game right away. Neither one of them came in slow as far as like playing the game. They came in with their ideas about the game, which didn't necessarily work out for either of them, right? So I do think the oil and water analogy really is the best, because they just didn't think about Survivor as a whole, and that Survivor is not just encompassing yourself and not just encompassing how you want to be perceived and how you want to be handled and I don't know, like just talked about in the tribe, and how you want people to associate you in the tribe. There's all of these other components that you need to build into your game, and neither one of them were really able to do so because they just were too, I think, caught up in their own mindset with how they were going to play the game, as opposed to playing the game based upon what was transpiring around them.
Yeah. I'm just sitting here thinking, oil and water. Who is oil and who is water? Rocksroy to me is water, because you need it to live. You need it, it's calm. You need it to live. And oil, slipperier. And that seems, to be Tori. So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, Rocksroy and Tori started the game on the same tribe and ended on the same day. Their games couldn't have been more different, and yet there were similarities. Both of them had pretty bad social games, which makes it that much less of a surprise that they didn't get along. Rocksroy talked down to people. Tori was sarcastic and acknowledges that she cringed when she watched herself back at certain times. Both of them were also threats to hurt other people's games by the time they were voted out. Tori had been a threat like that the entire game. Rocksroy turned into one when he finally decided to play the game and didn't do it very well. They were playing two very different games. Tori was playing Survivor. Rocksroy was playing Wilderness Survival. Tori thought being super schemy was the key to moving forward. Rocksroy thought not doing any scheming at all was the key. And they both were voted out on the same night because they were on far opposite ends of the spectrum, where the middle was the correct place to be. Yes, Rocksroy, you need to scheme and plot. No, Tori, not that much. Rocksroy was playing Survivor like it was 2003. But even in 2003, his strategy, such as it was, wouldn't have won him the game. Meanwhile, Tori was playing the game at 2003 miles per hour, doing the wrong things and then trying to cover by lying and claiming she was trustworthy and loyal. But nobody believed her. And that is why Rocksroy and Tori lost.
2003 miles per hour.
Yes. Well, had to make it match.
I know. I like it. That's good. You always make me giggle.
Oh, well, good. All right. Well, before we get to our new predictions, which obviously we will get completely right,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let me remind everyone to go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed so you can get the poster of the rules we just discussed, and the t-shirts, and the mug, and anything else your little heart desires.
So many good things.
Yes. So predictions.
I don't like predictions. Shocking, I know.
It seems to me like Romeo should be the obvious next person voted out.
Yeah.
But what's going to be really interesting is that, as Andy Martin mentioned on Twitter, half of the tribe is going to show up at camp having gone through a really emotional night, while the other half is just sitting there chilling because they just got rid of Rocksroy and obviously have no idea what just happened.
Yeah.
Considering how surprised everyone in the second tribal council was to see Rocksroy on the jury, that first group is going to have some splaining to do.
Yeah.
Just as Mike worried about. I do think there's an easy way to just go over how Rocksroy was planning to turn on the May Alliance with the guys thing, but they're going to need to sell it, even though it was the truth. Still, I think Mike, Omer, Lindsay, 100% safe. Okay? If Omer continues to keep Taku safe, then that means Jonathan and Marianne are good too. But Drea now knows she was supposed to be the target, which could shake things up a bit in that big group alliance. She does still have several weapons at her disposal. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see her use knowledge is power on Mike to steal and use his idol if she feels any hint that things may go against her again.
Right.
Okay. So all that said, that really leaves us with Hai and Romeo. One question is whether Hai's reaction to the vote Romeo cast against him was foreshadowing something bigger, or just a little bit of drama to make us think Romeo was likely going last episode. Are others going to realize how he's been directing so much of the strategy, which is what Romeo wanted? You know, and we know Romeo's going to try to point them in that direction. It's a question of whether they'll listen. But he is sitting there as the more obvious next person to go. Now, I know that Rob has predicted Hai as the next one out. I hate to be a copycat, but I also want to give you back a little of what you. Well, I also want to give you back a little of what you gave me with predicting Chanel. So I'm going to say Hai will be the next one out.
Yeah. No. That is not going to happen.
Okay. You just will that into not being.
I am going to will that into not happening. So I do think that it is an interesting kind of dynamic, because the fact that they've spent so much time pointing out the Hai and Romeo thing, I feel like could be a different, there could be a different reason for it, in that they end up working together because they were so against each other, because Romeo even said, I'm like helping the person who was trying to get me out of the game. And they did seem to be spending a lot of time on that. So I feel like it's going to be for a different reason, that suddenly they kind of come together and realize that they should work together.
And Romeo won't want to kick him in the face anymore?
No, I don't think he will.
Okay.
But, you know, I do still love that expression.
Yes.
So I'm thinking, with everything that transpired and Drea learning that she was the target of that last vote, and that was coming from Jonathan, I think is certainly going to cause some issues. And I think that Drea is going to be pushing very hard to do something about that. And I think that the only person that she could really focus on in that regard is Jonathan, just because it seemed like he was the one who was creating all of that, right? He wanted to, it was a big move and he wanted to pull this off. And so he was telling everybody what to do. And I think Marianne and Lindsay made it pretty clear that they were not appreciating how he was telling them what they needed to do and why they needed to do what they were doing. And so I feel like Jonathan might be in trouble.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and if that is true, then we will discuss this next week. I do want to say, and I think other people have said this too. Okay, we knew Jonathan was not a strategic genius, but for him to make Marianne the alternate,
yeah,
the
that didn't
decoy,
make any sense.
made no sense at all, and is part of what threw everything into chaos.
Exactly, right.
And he didn't think it through. Lindsay pointed it out, and
Lindsay was like, "This is why that's a bad idea."
Right.
Yeah,
he got 11 face. He just, yeah. Lindsay, by the way, is also rising in my ranks of potential winners. I think she is getting just enough focus here and there. I mean, she's mostly purple, but getting just enough little things that we could see her as the winner.
Yeah.
So just interesting, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But all right. Well, with that, as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. You get access to the weekly Survivor Academy podcast, where there are revolving professors, the patron 5 for 5, and much more. And when Rob isn't talking directly to everyone, there are Facebook groups and Discord to keep you occupied with a great community of people, including both of us, where you could talk about Survivor, Big Brother, life in general. You can support shows like ours and everything on the network by becoming a patron at robhasawebsite.com/patron, or just click on the link at our robhasawebsite.com/YXLost feed. And once you get to the Facebook groups, make sure to say hello.
And you can also say hello to us on Twitter. I am at Jessica Lewis 89. Oh, I got it that time. Mm-hmm. And he is at David Bloomberg. You should definitely follow us both to get both sides of the story. And I will say that, you are beating me on some of those tweets during the live tweeting. Mm-hmm. So, but you should definitely follow us both. We tweet throughout the week as well. And you should also follow David Bloomberg on his TikTok account. As you have heard multiple times, there's lots of videos up and coming at David_Bloomberg. And those certainly find their way to Twitter and also Instagram, but you should definitely follow him there as well.
Yes. And on Instagram, I'm david.e.bloomberg, which I don't know why I did that. But I mean, I know that other things were taken, but who knew there were so many David Bloombergs in the world?
There's only one David Bloomberg that matters.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So with that, also make sure you're subscribed, everyone, to all of the RHAP Survivor podcasts. Again, by going to our YX Lost feed page, you'll find great content like the Know-It-Alls, Stock Watch, Survivor International, the B&B, and all the other podcasts that come through the week. There was just this week already, there was a great interview with Jamal, for example. Mm-hmm. Perfect timing to have him on. It's sometimes things just fall into place. Mm-hmm. And everybody's like, wow, it was great that you could get Jamal on such short notice. And it's like, no, Jamal was always scheduled for this week.
Right. He was planned.
Yeah. So other podcasts, though, that you can definitely and should definitely listen to. Another good one is the Hot Mess Express is en route to a new destination with season 9 of 90 Day Fiance. Season 9.
That's crazy.
And your conductor, Puya Zanvakili, has got you covered. Who is going to be the worst couple? Who will rise up the weekly power rankings? These are just a few of the questions that Puya will answer weekly with an amazing cast of guests coming throughout the season to talk about the wild ride that is 90 Day Fiance.
That stuff's crazy. Oh, do I thank people now? Is this where we're at? Yes. I always forget. So I would like to thank Scott St. Pierre for all of the editing that he does on not only the Why Blank Lost podcast, but all of the podcasts that come out of RHAP. So thank you so much, Scott, for all of the incredibly difficult and time-consuming tasks that you take upon yourself at the wee hours of the morning and getting out all of the content for RHAP. So thank you so much for that. And thank you to Will from America for our amazing theme song, which is very catchy. We love it. Thank you very much, Will. And thank you, David, for getting us through this. And look at that. It's only an hour and 19 minutes in and we talked about 2 people. So that's pretty impressive.
I know. Well, I think a lot of that is because it was, like I said at the beginning, it was 2 tribal councils and a challenge. And, there, and also there weren't any stupid really bad twists to rant about, which sometimes takes up time.
That's true. We do that a lot. Sometimes, maybe.
But yeah, so thank you, Jessica, of course. And it's always great to have you here. And so with that, everybody, we will see you right here, same bat time, same bat station in a week. Bye.
Bye.